That's true. Good. Okay, it's time to start.
You're so bright. Is that normal?
Yeah, it's time to start. Rob, welcome. Rob Jutelis from Factor Bikes. I'm really happy to have you on the show. Factor is new for our family this year in Wolfi's. So we have the bikes now in the store and we're really excited and we got already really good response for it. So we're happy to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks very much. I would say, being in Wolfi's was always a dream of ours and a goal of ours. And we're happy, I think from the first time we talked probably 4 years ago until now that we finally made that goal and that dream come true.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's very nice for me to say. Tell us a bit about yourself and about your story, Rob, how you came into cycling industry, who inspired you to get into cycling and now until Factor.
Yeah, well, I started off, riding bikes at a very young age. I think I was 12 or 13 years old. And I grew up in South Florida, Miami, in the United States, where I became a fledgling bike racer and moved all the way through to the professional ranks. Back in the 80s, Miami was one of the places in America where cycling was starting to really grow much more than other parts of America. So I was very lucky that I was located there. And, I had somewhat of a cycling career, but, not really so much to speak of. It's more about my engineering career, which has brought me to where we are today. So because of bike racing, I ended up in Taiwan in 1996, racing the Tour of Taiwan, which was a pretty big event at the time. And while I was there, I was presented with some opportunities to continue to stay in Taiwan and to work for the very first carbon fiber bicycle factory in almost the world at that point. And so, I thought, well, I could continue to race for a couple more years, or maybe it's good to take this opportunity now. I studied chemical engineering in university. And so I was like, well, I have this degree. I don't know that much about the process yet, but I'm sure I can learn. And so, I took that opportunity to work for this first carbon fiber factory. And it's been, one thing leading to another that has got me to where I am today with Factor.
Very cool. No, I mean, I had this question a little bit later in the talk, but now we're talking about the factories.
Sure.
Where do you start? I mean, I'm always amazed, obviously. Do you start with the carbon fiber? What's really the key of making such a special product? How does it start?
Well, I always kind of define carbon fiber manufacturing is it's actually a very low-tech process, which yields a very high-tech product. So if you look at the process, it's very much all done by hand. It can't be done by robot. And it's very labor intensive. So, you're starting with the raw carbon fiber material where you add the resin to the material. And, from there, you start to manipulate the material based off of the properties to achieve the goal that you're looking for, whether it be a bicycle or a handlebar or a seat post. But, it starts off as, a very simple process. And there's not a whole lot written about it. You can't find it in books. It's very much kind of a black art. And so it's funny when I mentioned I worked for the very first carbon fiber factory, because I can trace almost the lineage of every carbon fiber factory in the world back to that first carbon fiber factory. How engineers who worked there moved to another factory. And so I can trace the lineage from the very beginning until now.
Interesting. So if you would explain somebody just in basic terms, how does it start? It's kind of like a baking form and then you cut fiber.
What happens is it's a material, very much, you could think of it like a cloth material, but it's a little bit stiffer. It's full of resin, glue. And what happens is you're basically wrapping it around a balloon is probably the best way to explain it. And then the resin, it reacts with heat. So what happens is as you put it into a closed mold, which is very heavy, which is the shape of the bicycle. And then what's happening is that the air pressure on the inside of the material is increasing, forcing the carbon fiber to take the shape of the mold. And at the same time, the heat is ramping up. So it starts at around 70 degrees Celsius and it ramps up to about 140 degrees Celsius. And at that time, after about 1 hour of curing, you have a fully hardened carbon fiber part. You open the mold, you release the part from the mold. It looks a little bit rough at that point, but that's pretty much the finished carbon fiber part. So it then requires quite a bit of hand finishing, sanding, polishing, painting to make it look like the beautiful product that we end up as the finished part. So of course, I really simplify it because there's a lot of technology that goes into knowing exactly where to put that carbon fiber, what type of material, what grade of material. That's really where the skill comes in. Lots of people can make a 90% good product. Very few can make that last 10%.
Interesting. You were speaking about the balloon, and I know there's different kinds. There's kind of silicone balloons, and there's kind of more like a plastic bag looking kind of.
Well, the technology continues to evolve. What we use is pretty much the most highest level, and it's actually latex. So it's very much made the same way as like a surgical glove. So it has to be, it's basically, it would look like the inside of the frame is made in styrofoam. And then that styrofoam is then dipped into latex. And it's several times dipping, because latex, every time you dip it, it adds a little bit thicker. So this is essentially what represents the inside of the frame. It is going to finally look like. And that way we then have this latex, we call it a preform. So there's styrofoam, latex, and then we're wrapping the carbon fiber onto that before it's put into the mold. So to give you an example, most companies, what they use is it's called a polyethylene bag. It's like a plastic bag, very strong plastic bag. And they don't have the shape of the inside of the frame nearly as finely developed as we do. So what they're doing is they're forcing much more material to find the shape of the mold, because they're not using a very finely tuned preform.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we've seen this when we have, unfortunately, sometimes obviously we see crashed frames, and then we see sometimes, obviously we can look then inside the frame, which is normally not possible. And then you can see that some frames look completely different on the inside, very rough, very uneven, even sometimes sharp edges and stuff. And then you see other frames where we feel, okay, higher quality, and you can feel how nicely even they are and how the wall thickness is very evenly distributed through the whole tube.
Yes, we're actually sending some samples to your shop that are of our frames that after they've been cut open. And actually the inside surface looks almost exactly the same as the outside surface. And that's always our goal is, we want it, if you were riding the bicycle inside out, it would still look beautiful.
Okay, that's why as well you have a clear coat only on the outside. You don't use a lot of paint to make the frames look good. You just keep that clear because you can show your work.
Normally, I mean, that's what I prefer. That's my choice. Is I really like the fact that it is made of carbon fiber, and we should show people the level of craftsmanship that went into it. We shouldn't have to cover it with a lot of paint, because at that point it could be any material. And of course, paint adds weight. And so why go to all of this effort of making the world's lightest frame and then adding 200 grams of paint to cover up any blemishes that you have?
And do you think in the past years that it was rather the development of the material which brought up the development, or was it rather the skills and the learnings by building frames and so on, which makes the frame so much better today?
I've now been doing this for 25 years. And honestly, there's nothing new in the material today, for the most part, that we didn't have 25 years ago. It's been more about a willingness to try something new and a willingness of sometimes the brands to kind of push the barriers. If you think about it, 10 years ago, all of the dropouts were made of aluminum, right? They were aluminum on a carbon fiber frame. And then a couple of companies that I was working for at the time, decided, let's make them out of carbon fiber. And let's understand, is it good enough to work, long-term out in the field? And so, I used to manufacture frames for other companies, And I did this for Cervelo and for Santa Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden it worked. And then all of a sudden it became the industry standard.
Mm-hmm.
But there was really nothing that we knew different in making a carbon fiber dropout. There was nothing magical about it. It was a willingness to try, and it was a willingness of a brand to take that risk in selling it into the market. But it wasn't that, oh, now we could make carbon fiber dropouts and then we couldn't. That isn't really the case.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you have obviously different products. You produce bars, you have stem bar combos, you have wheels, you have frames. What's the most challenging piece to build? Is it a frame, or is there something else? Is wheels more challenging?
Yeah, I would say, well, for many years, we were sort of like the industry leader in carbon fiber stems, again, making for other companies before having our own. I guess we should probably talk about that later. But certainly making a sub 700 gram disc brake frame, that's by far the most challenging product that we make. And it's pretty much, the most challenging product that any company makes, because we can see essentially Canyon has one, and now I think Specialized has one, and nobody else in the industry has come anywhere close to that. So.
Very good, very good. I got a bit carried away because it was already so interesting. We have a little video as well that people can see what Factor is all about. And you have a very nice, cool center in UK where people have an experience center. And we have prepared a little video clip for a minute long to give the people watching a bit of an impression what's Factor all about. So Will, if you don't mind, if you start this. Yes, thank you. Very cool. Very nice.
Yeah.
I like that you say a Factor experience, and because we have something we call the Wolfi's experience. So I think we are maybe aligned with our ideas of a customer experience.
Well, I think that kind of comes down to it. We found in the UK that there really wasn't anybody who could tell our story for us. So we had to do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we work with partners like Wolfi's that we believe can tell our story, understand the same philosophies that we have. So then we trust that, we can work together as partners, because it's impossible for us to manage every aspect around the world, but we have to find the right partners who can help us in those regions.
Very good. Thank you so much. Going back to frame building. So what's more difficult here, to build an Aero frame, or is lightweight a little bit easier to accomplish? Because obviously light, you can measure, you can take the frame to a scale and say, okay, now it's light, and you can test it. But aerodynamic, obviously, some things for me look aerodynamic, and then we find out they're not as aero. So how do you go about that? What's more challenging?
Your question to me, it reminds me of a famous Eddie Merckx quote. Somebody asked Eddie Merckx once, which is easier, spinning or using big gears? And Eddie said, spinning big gears.
Okay.
So it's kind of, what's the most challenging? Making a super light aerodynamic frame. And so we have the O2 VAM, which really pushed the boundary of weight, but it wasn't as challenging actually as the Ostro VAM, because the Ostro VAM, now it has much larger tube sections. It is very aerodynamic, but it really pushes the weight boundary. And so if we look at, which is more difficult to make, obviously the Ostro VAM is a very complicated frame to make, because we're still achieving very similar weights as the O2 VAM, but with much more complicated tube sections. And, to go even one step further, if we look at our truly aero bike, the one with the split down tube, this bike is actually very complicated to make because of that twin vane down tube that we have, where the air can flow between it. So then, that bike is much less focused on weight, much more focused on aerodynamics. But then, if we look at sort of the pyramid of, aerodynamic to weight, the Astro is going to sit right in the middle. It's not quite as aero as the one, but it's definitely much lighter than the one, but a little bit heavier than the O2 VAM. So it kind of sits right in the middle there. And so that's pretty much, what makes it the most complicated frame for us.
Okay, very good. Going back to the beginning of Factor, obviously there was a person called John Bailey, there was Aston Martin, there were disc brakes on a bike. I remember when we saw that bike, the Factor 001, that was way ahead of the time. Yeah, so we really, it was almost looked a bit strange to us, because obviously disc brakes were hardly on mountain bikes, but they were already on that bike. So can you take us a little bit back again to the beginning of Factor?
Sure. Factor was started by a company called BF1, or Aero F1, out of the UK. And they were a company that made telemetry for supercars, Formula One, difficult projects. John Bailey was the owner of BF1. And John decided he wanted to give his engineers a challenge. And so he thought, oh, well, they've never made a bicycle before. And then his next sentence was, how hard could it be? Mm-hmm. Well, they found out that it's very, very hard, but they came up with some very interesting technologies. They came up with the patent for the split down tube that we still use today. Mm-hmm. They did develop their own hydraulic disc brakes using Shimano STI levers. They had direct mount disc brakes even before Shimano had ever thought about it. In fact, some of the technologies they came up with, they actually licensed back to Shimano. So it was a very interesting project because they were a telemetry company. They had about 30 points of different measurements that the bike could do, whether it be, just the standard heart rate to actual G forces to turning angles. It had quite a lot. They made their own power meter even. Of course, SRM existed at the time, but there was pretty much SRM and then the Factor 001 power meter. Were the first two. So they really developed a crazy amount of technology, but they had no understanding of geometry of a bicycle, and the bicycle rode horribly, predominantly because of geometry. And so when they then later contacted me because they wanted to go one step further and develop a more sort of commercialized bike that was designed by them, but made by someone else. And so at that time, I was doing contract manufacturing. So I owned factories in Asia, and I was manufacturing for many different brands. And they contacted me and said, we'd like to do that. And so I started to work with them, on that project. That was the Factor Vice Verez, which won the Eurobike Gold Medal Award. Was still a very interesting bike, very expensive bike, but they really didn't know exactly how to go about selling it. So it never really led anywhere again. And so then I approached them a couple of years later asking if they would be interested in selling basically the trademark Factor to me, because I thought it was a very interesting name. It had a very interesting heritage. And so I ended up purchasing it from them. John Bailey later came back in as actually my partner in the UK and is still involved in the brand now after he sold BF1 to another engineering company.
Very good.
And then,
yes, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The first bikes, I think, were as well in collaboration with Aston Martin, and I think you had to buy an Aston Martin in order to be allowed to buy a Factor 001.
Yes, what it was Aston Martin was developing the 177, and so if you bought a 177 for £1 million, you had the opportunity to buy the Aston Martin 001, a Factor bike, for another £40,000. And they made about 70 of these. I think they sold 66 of them. I have 2 of them. John Bailey has a couple. And then there's some in a museum in the UK as well.
Wow, that's a good story. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
You did some, you were speaking about, you worked for other companies, and I think you worked with some of the biggest name, Profile Design, Zip, Synthase, a big company from Germany I'm very familiar with. You built carbon handlebars for them, Santa Cruz, Cervelo bikes, Focus. All these brands are kind of really much related to your engineering and to your production company in Asia, correct?
That's correct. I mean, there was the very famous, German handlebar brand called Synthase, and Synthase, he's a bit of a crazy engineer, but he's really, really quite demanding. And so I was lucky when I founded my first company in Taiwan. Synthase was one of our very first customers. And so Synthase, he's very testing minded. So I really learned a lot about testing of handlebars and seat posts and stems from Synthase. Which really gave us the understanding that we were going to build our brand very much, our company very much engineering driven, and that testing was always going to be at the very forefront of what we did. And so that led us, when we started to manufacture frames, we worked with, as you mentioned, Cervelo, Santa Cruz, BH, Parley, pretty much the who's who of the industry. We worked with Envy, with Zip, for those kind of products. And so it was kind of a, when I decided that I wanted to have my own brands, it was a pretty easy transition on the product side. That wasn't really the challenge. The challenge was, having a brand is very much different than running a factory.
Yeah, it's a completely different thing as well, marketing, and then obviously getting involved with the Pro Tour teams. But you were very successful. I think you started Factor, and then you went with Roman Bardet and AG2R, and immediately on a podium in the Tour de France. That was quite an achievement.
Yeah, I think that even though I didn't have a brand, I think a lot of people sort of in the inner circle of the bicycle industry have always known me and known of my company. And so it made it a little bit easier for someone like AG2R and Roman Bardet to accept that here's a company that really hasn't sold anything yet, but is asking to sponsor our team, and doesn't have a time trial bike yet available for us to test, but yet we trust in the time trial bikes that they've made in the past, that they will come up with something good. And so, yeah, we were very lucky that even before we started to sell bikes, we finished third in the Tour de France, second to Paris-Roubaix, on, before we really had even established ourselves.
Very good. So Roman Bardet used, I guess, an O2 VAM for his climbing abilities. And what bike was used in Roubaix?
What we had, this was before we're now on to the second generation of O2. So Roman Bardet was racing on the first generation of O2. And so that was the bike of choice that he liked. And ironically, the same bike that got third in the Tour de France got second to Paris-Roubaix. There was absolutely no difference between them. So they were both racing on the O2. A year later is when we launched the One. And then Roman was switching between the One and the O2 based off of different race courses and profiles. So he was third at Flanders on the One.
Okay, interesting. We have a little clip that people understand what we're speaking about, the O2 VAM. And I would like ask Will to start the clip, please. VAM, very cool. Yeah, very nice. So VAM is vertical altitude meters, and you use it for the Ostro and for the O2.
That's correct. for sort of our halo lightweight product, we wish to use the moniker VAM. And so, you know, when we first started to think about the O2 VAM, I was actually involved in the Cervelo Project California, which was a very, very light bicycle made in the United States by Cervelo in their own facility, but I helped with some of the products that went into it. And I always knew that we could probably do something better. I also knew that I wanted to give it the goal of being sub 700 grams for a disc brake bike, which, you know, Cervelo had never made a disc brake version of their Cervelo RCA. Yes. And I knew, you know, that there was materials available, such as Techstream, that would really benefit such a lightweight bike. But a lot of times people had used Techstream as a cosmetic material when we put Techstream as the innermost material where it's actually can't even be seen. And so in developing this bike, we knew we already had the first version of O2, which was such a fantastic all-around bike. So we already had, you know, a pretty big target that we had to beat. And so that's why we really decided to focus on weight, tire clearance, and then making it where there was really no excuse why a disc brake bike couldn't be ridden in the Tour de France, because it weighs less than 6.8 kilos, which, you know, up until a year ago, nobody had achieved that goal, and we were the first ones.
Very cool. And then as well in Roubaix with 30 millimeter tire clearance, or did you have to build a bike with a higher clearance?
We used, when we say 30, in fact, you can fit almost a 32. Okay. So we just use the standard bikes. We don't offer the pros anything different than what we're selling. So Andre Greipel, an incredibly strong human, is riding exactly the same bike as Chris Froome, who's riding exactly the same bike that you can buy, you know, from Wolfi's.
Okay, that's very cool. Yeah, because that was one of my questions I had later. Were you afraid when Andre got on the bike that he would just break it in half?
I'm always afraid of that when I see him on the home trainer, but yes, so far he hasn't done that yet. So.
Very good, very good. And he's riding a one, or next year maybe then the Ostro?
I think he's going to use both bikes next year. Okay. I think as a pure sprinting bike, if it's a pure flat stage, he would be on a one. On a stage that's a little hillier, he would be riding an Ostro. And then on days where he's trying to survive, he'll be on an Ostro.
Okay. I saw in the video you mentioned graphite and boron. Is it graphene? Yes. Graphite? What do you think about this graphene thing?
Right now, lots of people are talking about graphene. Graphene has actually not been commercialized anywhere in carbon fiber, even though people talk about it. You know, the expense of graphene at this point would be, it would be so, you know, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars to make a noticeable difference in a carbon fiber bicycle frame. So while they're using the word graphene quite a bit, it means that they took a little dust and they sprinkled it on it and they call it graphene. But essentially there really is no graphene in the bicycle. Well, I don't want to say in the bicycle industry, but in carbon fiber, there is no graphene making a discernible difference. Our bikes are using a material called pitch fiber, which is made by a company in Japan called Nippon Graphite. So that's actually the brand of the company. Pitch fiber is incredibly stiff, very, very expensive, and very, very difficult to work with. So it's so stiff that you could almost break it while you're putting it onto the bicycle. So you need to be incredibly careful when you're actually doing the manufacturing of it. A lot of times you hear people talking about super high modulus, and they're using these kind of buzzwords. Again, in the bicycle industry, if you made a frame out of super high modulus, you wouldn't be able to ride it down the street. It would snap in half. So, you know, a lot of times companies, they use these words, but they're just not at all accurate. So we're not using super high modulus, we're using pitch fiber. And we use it, you know, just in very important places to prevent bending stiffness. And then we're using boron. I think we're one of only 2 factories or companies that are using boron in their bicycles, because boron is a very good material for preventing what we call sort of an oil canning effect, where the tube is able to swell in different directions when it's under load. So we put boron in our seat tube, and then that provides a lot of more extra comfort in a bike like the O2 VAM or the Astra.
Okay, interesting. We just spoke about Andre Greipel being on his indoor trainer, and I got a question from one of our customers, Dennis Eckhoff, and he said he's a super proud owner and is very thankful for his Factor 1. It rides amazingly well, and he puts it sometimes on the indoor trainer, and he hears different things. So is it easy to break? Is it recommended? You can do it, you can't do it?
What I can say is bicycles were not designed for the forces that they see on an indoor trainer. So an indoor trainer, the rear of the frame is completely constrained, right? When if you go ride a bicycle outside, you have a rear wheel that can move side to side. So, when we're designing bicycles, we're not designing them for indoor trainers. However, for the most part, unless you're doing something gravely wrong, the bicycles from Factor have no issue being used on a home trainer.
Okay, very good. I think he will be very happy to hear that. Speaking about the bikes, obviously again with classics, Nils Pollitt was riding the bikes, and is there any different things you're doing, or is there no different frame used for the classics, or what are the different?
Again, we don't believe that it's necessary. We believe, that our bikes are properly tuned so that, they have the necessary comfort, the necessary stiffness to be able to handle a ride like Roubaix. So, most of the riders, they were, intending to use the O2 with a 30 millimeter, our blacking 30 millimeter wheel. Unfortunately, Paris-Roubaix got canceled this year, but they did do a lot of testing there. With the exception of a little bit larger tire and maybe an extra roll of handlebar tape, the plan was to ride exactly the production bike.
Very good. And now you're working with Chris Froome as well, and I heard he's really much into his cycling, and he knows a lot about technologies. Is any special setups you do for riders which have surprised you, or where you learn from the teams? And how much do you take away from a cooperation like with Israel Startup Nation?
I think that, we had done probably about 10 different iterations of the Astra, of different stiffnesses. And we knew what the differences were. We gave them to some specific riders and we asked them to try. And some riders couldn't really tell the difference between one or another. Some riders are much more sensitive, and they could definitely tell what was different, what they liked. And we used that information to come up with the final version that we supplied at the Tour de France in 2020. And so not every rider is like Chris Froome. Chris Froome is very sensitive, and he does have very good understanding of the way the bicycle works and what he wants it to do. And so it's really kind of a pleasure to work with him. Andre Greipel is actually also the same way. Of course, Andre wants it as strong and as stiff as possible, but our bikes met that goal even before he rode them. He was just happy with it. He didn't need to request anything special.
We had Andre as well on the show, so yeah, very interesting, and we met a couple of times here in Dubai. Yeah, very interesting character. We have another video clip about the one bike with the split down tube, and we just maybe will, if you play that clip, so we know all of what we're talking about. Wow, very nice. So you said the split down tube was something which came from Factor and was patented, and you're the only company allowed using this. And can you tell us, obviously Dubai is very flat. We're looking for fast riding, and that seems to be the bike to go for.
Absolutely. I mean, even before I talk about our own wind tunnel testing, Tour Magazine, they did their own private wind tunnel testing. That's the German magazine of all of the World Tour bikes, and essentially, you know, the Cervelo S5 and the Factor 1 were basically tied for first place as the two fastest aerodynamic bikes that, you know, are seen in the World Tour. In our own testing, of course, we go to the wind tunnel, and as I told you, you know, our bikes rank from, you know, the 1 being our fastest to the O2 being the slowest, and it is a pretty big measurable difference between those 3 bikes, with the Austro obviously in the middle. So certainly in a place like Dubai, and certainly if you're riding in any sort of, you know, bunch or even off the front by yourself, you know, the 1 would be the fastest bike, you know, in that scenario. It does come with a little bit of a, I don't want to say a penalty, but it's a stiffer bike. And so it's, you know, you definitely feel, you know, like you're putting a, you know, all the power you put into that bike gets directly transferred into the road, but at the same time, some of that road comes back to you.
Okay, what's the tire clearance? How, 28 millimeters?
It's designed for 28, and you can get also 30 in there as well without any issue.
Very good. And how much would you say is contributed for the speed coming from the bayonet fork and that special fork design you have and the handlebar setup? And how much is from the split down tube?
I would say it's almost a third, because you know, the handlebar makes a very big difference, because the handlebar is, you know, the furthest forward part of the bike, and it is, you know, it is quite aero and quite flat. The fork, what happens is we have a very narrow head tube and we have a pretty wide stance fork. So there's plenty of air that can pass through the fork, and then that air doesn't get caught by the down tube. It actually flows through the down tube. And so we are actually able to pretty easily test this, because when we went to the wind tunnel, we actually did some runs where we taped the twin vanes shut. So it's very easy to do. We just put tape on it, and then we were actually able to measure what is the difference with and without the tape. And it was it wasn't insignificant. It was about 11 watts different with and without the tape. So it's pretty significant savings there. And since you're not seeing a lot of rain in Dubai, it is pretty it's a pretty good design, because of course it doesn't protect the water bottle from getting dirty when it's when you have any kind of water coming up off the road, but because you're not getting a lot of rain there, so that's nothing that you have to concern yourselves with.
Okay, interesting. And so is it rather the air coming from the tire which kind of goes smoothly through the frame?
That's correct. So it's the air, because you have the wide fork, so the only air that's coming through is actually the air that's the turbulence on the tire, and that's able to pass through the frame. And of course, it's not perfect because you do have a water bottle there. Without the water bottle, it's still quite a bit faster. But even with the water bottle, it's still channeling that air through. And so, you know, it is a definite advantage.
So you would say one water bottle, you would put it on the C tube, not on the down tube.
Well, I think that's all aero bikes. You know, it's obviously faster on the C tube than on the down tube, on time trial triathlon bikes as well. So.
Okay, very much. And then you have the same design you use on the slick on your time trial bike?
That's correct. So our slick, which is also a very fast time trial bike, is also using that same split down tube, and you know, a lot of the same design principles. I think one of the main differences aerodynamically is the top tube of the slick is completely horizontal, while on the one, it does have a little bit of a slope, because you know, we had to accommodate the standover height.
That's interesting. You know, I mean, I'm fascinated because I started my cycling on an 18 millimeter tire, then 20, 23, 25, 28, 30. And
same.
And I'm stunned, you know, I mean, how could we not have seen it? Obviously, we weren't able to put a bigger tire in because everything was so narrow and so on. And we were thinking we're going fast when we put an 18 millimeter tire and you put it up to 160 psi. You go 20 kilometers an hour and you feel like 50 because you're losing control. I'm always thinking, what are we missing right now? We haven't really thought about, which will later in 5 years, we will say, oh my God, how was this possible that we didn't see that coming? Is there anything you can?
Well, I think we will start to see more and more convergence between time trial bicycles and racing bicycles. And so we're already seeing, I used to ride a 42 millimeter handlebar. Now I'm down to 40. A lot of people are on 38. Some people are down to 36.
Yes.
I think that that's going to be sort of like the next big impact is going to be at the front of the bike, the way that we're holding on to it. I think that that's going to be sort of one of the next big challenges, and what could change is just that overall position, because we've already learned that holding on to the brake hoods with your arms at 90 degrees is actually faster than holding on to the drops, which again, who would have thought that until we had a wind tunnel and could actually see it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think that's one of the beauties, obviously, with your bikes, that it's a lot of them are kind of custom built for the customer, and we can choose. You have the setup, you have the one-piece handlebar, and they come almost in every possible combination, very narrow and a longer stem, so you can really get.
Yeah, I think that, I'm always sort of blown away when I see companies, they come out with a bar stem and they have 5 sizes, and I'm like, am I stupid and they're smart, or they're the other way around? Because yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we have 20 sizes, and in fact, we actually even have some sizes that we don't currently offer unless somebody specially requests it. So we actually have even more than 20 sizes in our bar stems, because we don't readily make the 140 available, but it does actually exist as well. So yeah,
I'm sure some of the teams, they have some requests which are like that. Yeah.
Yes, but what we are happy about is none of the riders ever need to get a like a negative rise stem, whether that be AG2R or now with Israel Startup Nation. We find that our geometry fits them quite well, and it fits our consumer quite well.
Very good. We're very close as well with Ceramic Speed, and I think you're really fond of that brand as well, and you feel as well to make bikes the best bikes in the world. We have upgraded a lot of bikes here in Dubai with this product, and the company Ceramic Speed is very close to us, but you're speccing the bikes already with a lot of Ceramic Speed on them.
Yeah, I think we don't do a great job at telling that story, that our bikes come standard with Ceramic Speed, because a lot of times people, they want to compare us to other brands, and they're like, oh, well, this Factor is the same price as this Cervelo or Pinarello. And I'm like, yeah, but this Factor comes with a Ceramic Speed bottom bracket, a Ceramic Speed headset. And when you start to look at it that way, it's actually quite reasonable price compared to some of those other bikes. So, but yes, I am, we want the customer to have that really premium experience, and bearings are an important part of that. And also, we want to design our bikes, I don't want to say a little less generic, but we design our bike already thinking about the Ceramic Speed bottom bracket. So we're working to tolerances that are much tighter, knowing that that's the bottom bracket that's going to be used. So we don't need to worry about if someone's going to try to use an inexpensive bottom bracket and have trouble with fitting it into a Factor because, the Factor is too tightly made. We know that it works perfect for Ceramic Speed, and that's really our only concern.
Okay, very good. Another question about all the models. We spoke now about the models. If you would sum up the models for us, just maybe in 1 or 2 sentences about the One, what would you say about the One?
Well, I think we have the One, which is our most aerodynamic, most racing bike focused. Then we have the Ostro VAM. It does not come in a standard Ostro version, nor will it ever. It's just the Ostro VAM. And that's sort of the bike that splits between the One and the O2, which is our all-around climbing bike. And the O2 comes in a VAM version as well as a more standard version. So, if somebody was trying to build a super light bike, they would go with an O2 VAM. If they wanted a more standard weight, it's still just 850 grams, they would go with a standard O2. We then have our LS, which is a racing gravel bike. It very much, if you looked at the O2 and you look at the LS, you would say, oh, it's an O2 gravel bike. And so that is kind of the idea behind it. It's not for carrying a bunch of cargo. It's not for, going camping with, it's for going fast in gravel. And then we have our Factor Vista, which is our all-road bike. It still has an external bayonet fork, much like the One. It's very comfortable, very good fitting bike, very fast bike. And it kind of splits between road and gravel. It still can go up to a 37 millimeter tire, works very well for both road and gravel. And then of course we have our slick time trial bike, which it does do double duty as a triathlon / time trial bike, but it really, it is designed with going fast in mind. It doesn't have so much storage like a lot of modern triathlon bikes. It is really designed for more shorter distance triathlons, like a 70.3 or shorter.
Very good. I like names as well, and I looked up. Ostro is a Mediterranean wind.
Yes. When we were first looking at the Tour de France start this year, it started in Nice, which is right on the Mediterranean. So we thought that was fitting.
Okay, very nice. And LS has a bit of a deeper meaning as a name.
Yeah, LS, it kind of pays homage to someone who really supported me as a young cyclist in Miami. He was the owner of a bicycle shop where I had a part-time job. And he was really, an influential person in my life. His name was Larry Shabazz. And so, we used the name LS. Some people said to me, oh, that name, it's kind of weak, or I don't really like it. And I told them, well, as soon as you have your own bike company, you can name the bikes whatever you want.
Yes, very good. And Factor, I think the CT is for cardio training.
No, Factor, Factor was a name, it's very much, Factor is from a numerical name. And so it comes, it's an engineering term. And so it was just decided that, it was a name that fit well from the engineering side at BF1. And that, the idea would be that, other numerical terms could be used for defining things.
Very cool. If you would pick one bike out of the range, what is your pick? What is your most common ride for yourself?
I really like our O2 VAM. I like the feeling of a bike like that. It's, it's just, to me, that's really pure cycling. Honestly, the Ostro, I haven't spent nearly as much time on it, but, I rode 20,000 kilometers last year. I only changed my bike once a year. Everybody's like, how many bikes do you own? And I'm like, one. And they're always very surprised by that. I ride one bike a year. So I rode the O2 VAM. I rode 20,000 kilometers last year, and I'll be changing to an Ostro soon because, of course, I should be, I want to know exactly what it is that our customers are feeling. But to me, so far, the O2 is a perfect bike.
Wow, but 20,000 kilometers, that's a solid year.
COVID.
Okay, COVID. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking quickly about COVID, what do you take away from COVID? Any learnings, personal, business, anything you would think is important?
I think, gosh, how can I say? I mean, there's a lot of tragedy behind COVID, obviously. But I think COVID has taught the world a really good lesson in many ways. I think it's really made us appreciate our family, appreciate what we have, taught a lot of people how to bake, taught people how to cook again. And it's given us time to let the earth heal a little bit because, the earth definitely needed a break. And, I think we've also learned, I used to travel about 150 days a year. Well, I'm not traveling, but life still goes on. And so we just figure out how to manage it. And I think that we will never go back, or at least not in my lifetime, to what we were doing pre-COVID. And so I think, there's a lot of positive that will come out of this. I'm just hoping that we can get over it soon.
Very good. And what do you consider your biggest invention? What's your most proud of what you have designed and done in the cycling industry?
Oh gosh, there's quite a lot. I think it really kind of comes down to a lot of the manufacturing techniques have been developed at our company. And then I don't want to say stolen by our competitors, but our competitors have learned from us because, we are always investing very heavily in R&D, whether before when we were making frames for others or now making frames for ourselves now. So we were the first with the styrofoam technology as a preform, the first with pitch fibers, so I think that, I look at, Specialized launched a bike a couple of months ago. That bike could have never been made had we not made the O2 VAM first.
Okay. I think it's kind of a compliment if you're leading the pack and you're chased and people are copying you. I think that's a kind of respect, a kind of sign of respect for your work, which you've done.
I think so, and I like that aspect of what we're doing because I always want to, I'm never upset when somebody copies me, or because we're always trying to stay ahead and we're always working on to the next thing. So by the time somebody catches up, we've already moved to the next level. And so I think, when we launched the O2 VAM, it had, external cable routing, much like that bike that I was talking about a few minutes ago. We moved that bike to fully internal cable routing without changing any of the external shape of the bike. So it didn't need to get bigger to accommodate hiding those cables, and it didn't gain any weight. To me, that's a very, very promising bit of engineering that, we weren't able to do it, or we didn't spend enough time doing it in the beginning, but we were able to accomplish it a year after launching that bike. And it makes that other company's bike looks a little bit odd because, oh, how come our bike has fully hidden cables and that bike still has external cables?
Okay, it's interesting. You said you're switching bikes once in a while, or once a year you're switching a bike. So what is the componentry in your favorite gadget you have to take from one bike to the other?
My SRM power meter.
Okay.
And right. I kind of hate to say it, but I'm a little more fond of Shimano than SRAM, but I haven't really given SRAM enough benefit of the doubt. I think I need to give them probably a try on my next new bike, but my SRM power meter still follows me.
Very good. I like the SRAM. I think it's very intuitive. I think the way they redesigned and rethought shifting patterns and how we operate our bikes today is super intuitive. If I had Shimano before, and sometimes you just make that mistake and you push the wrong lever. This has completely disappeared, and it's really nice and smooth. And I really like how innovative they are and how they have been challenged certain patents and stuff. And made it a product at the end really better and really changed the market with one buy and everything. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I can really appreciate what they're doing on the engineering side, and I'm really happy that Shimano has a viable competitor now, so that really they're both pushing each other to do the very best.
Very good. Looking back, so 2021 now, if you're going back to 2010, what would you tell Rob? To what you have learned and you would have wished you would have known in 2010?
That's a good question. I think, it's kind of funny. I don't know. I don't remember what year it was, but I was speaking with Fausto Pinarello.
Okay.
And Fausto Pinarello said to me, he's like, well, look at it. He's like, 5 years ago, our lightest bike was, 2,000 grams. Now it's 1,500 grams, or then it was 1,500. Now it's 1,000 grams. So does that mean in 5 years it's going to be 500 grams? And I said, I don't think so. I think we've kind of reached the limit. And that's what I thought in 2010. But obviously we hadn't reached the limit, and there was still a lot left to be done. And I think there still is a lot left to be done.
Okay, so always believe there's something more you can improve. And yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Very good. I have a few quick questions.
Sure.
Are you the greatest cyclist of all time?
Depends if you check my Instagram and who I'm friends with, but obviously that's an easy one. That's Eddie Merckx. Yeah.
Okay. The biggest upcoming talent in cycling?
Oh, there's so many. But I think it's really unfortunate that Remco had that crash this year. I kind of think it's gonna be him. But we didn't get to see it this year. So, but I mean, I'm so happy with the sport and these young guys. I think it's fantastic. But of course, I'd like to see Chris Froome win one more Tour de France while riding a Factor.
That's my next question. I think who's going to win the Tour de France 2021? So we know Chris Froome. Yes.
We'd certainly like to see that. Yeah, he's definitely doing everything right, giving himself the most opportunity.
Very good. You wear socks. You wear them long or short?
Long.
Long socks. Okay.
Yes.
Shaving your legs? Yes or no?
Still do it. Yeah. I can't get around not doing it. Yeah.
Sunday mornings, you lay in or you get up early and ride your bike?
No, Sunday's a great day to ride a bike. Yeah.
The wind is your friend or your enemy?
Depends. I always like to say, when I was a professional cyclist, my goal was always to crush people's souls. Then as I got older, it was to keep my own soul from being crushed.
Right.
And now it's more about getting to the coffee shop. So I enjoy the wind. It doesn't bother me. but you know, it depends who I'm riding with, and if they're making my life miserable, then I don't like it much.
Okay. If you're watching cycling, are you more a classics kind of type or Grand Tour?
I would say probably have become more classics. I think the Grand Tour, it's become a little too predictable. You only need to, it's like, you only need to watch the last half hour. And so that's a really unfortunate part of cycling.
It couldn't be more
right
true
now.
than this year. Yeah, that it was the last half an hour to decide everything. But I think this year Tour de France was just an amazing, actually all of the Grand Tours were really amazing.
Yeah, well, I think when you're racing like there's no tomorrow, which is what everybody was doing, it definitely changes the environment. I think the short stages, you know, I loved the short stages, you know, 100-kilometer stage with 2 mountain passes. I think that's where the sport needs to be heading. I don't think the riders now are too fit. They don't need the 4 hours of riding along to tire them out, because that isn't tiring them out. I mean, that's how the Tour de France used to exist. That's why they needed 200-kilometer stages. But now the riders are so strong, you know, they can ride 200 kilometers every single day and it makes no difference.
Yeah. That's true. If you go to a karaoke bar and you have to sing a song, what song would you pick?
Oh, My Way, for sure.
Okay, okay, very good. Very good. What makes you happy?
Very simple things in life. Just things going smooth, healthy family, good business, good coffee,
Good
nice
coffee,
food.
yeah. And coffee, is it espresso or cappuccino?
Depends what time of day.
Very good. Good. This is the right answer. Yeah. Very good. If you had one piece of advice or quote or anything you want to give to the viewers, it can be anything, cycling related, anything, any tips you want to give a cyclist, anything you learned in life, anything which inspires you?
Well, gosh, there's so much that inspires me. But if we're talking about, you know, this bicycle industry, I would like people to find good resources they can trust. Don't believe all of the marketing hype, you know, and really, you know, trust people to give you good guidance when we're looking, you know, at what's going on in the cycling industry.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. If you could spend one day with a person, dead or alive, anyone, with whom would you like to spend the day?
Gosh, again, a tough one, but if I had to choose the bicycle industry, I would want to spend a day with Simon Matra, the founder of Rafa. I think he's done an amazing job, and I don't own anything from Rafa, but I'm just so amazed by the company that he created.
Interesting. I hope I get him on a talk in the next couple of months, because we started in 2020. We started with Rafa and we had an amazing success. And then I completely agree with you. I think he built something really interesting and an amazing brand, and really well received. And we had great success in 2020. And I hope that we have the same success in 2021 with Factor. And I want to thank you for the time, and thanks for your kind words and for the insights we got about the brand and the bicycle industry. I think it's very interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward. Hopefully we get to travel and we see us maybe in Taiwan, and maybe we can visit the factories and see more about Factor.
Sure, that sounds great. And I think that, you know, something that maybe some of your listeners have already found or will find is I'm very accessible. So if anybody ever sends me a message on Facebook, on Instagram, or if they happen to find my email, which is pretty easy to figure out, I'm very accessible, and I'm always very happy to chat and answer any questions.
That's very kind. Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate your time. All the best, and looking forward to see you. Yeah, stay healthy.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, everyone,
Bye-bye.
for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.